Have you ever sat in a meeting, a classroom, or even at a family dinner, and thought to yourself, why is the loudest, most confident person the one everyone seems to listen to, even when they're obviously wrong? We've all seen it. The coworker who doesn't really understand the project, but somehow gets promoted. The politician who makes sweeping promises without substance, yet captures millions of votes. The influencer who claims to have all the answers, while the true experts get buried under complexity and nuance. It's frustrating, even maddening. But what if I told you this pattern isn't random? What if incompetence and power are not opposites, but strange partners that often dance together in history, politics, and even your workplace? To explore this paradox, let's step back, way back, to the world of Machiavelli, the Machiavellian lens. In Renaissance Florence, exiled from the political arena he loved, Machiavelli wrote one of the most controversial books in history, The Prince. This wasn't a book about how rulers should behave ideally. It was a book about how power actually worked in the real world. And one of Machiavelli's most unsettling insights was this: people care more about appearances than reality, he wrote. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are. Think about that for a moment. In your own life, how often do people judge based on confidence, body language, or tone, rather than the actual content of your words? Machiavelli recognized that a leader didn't need to be competent. They only needed to appear competent. Now, let's connect that with something modern science has uncovered: the Dunning-Kruger effect, the fool who thinks he's wise. Psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, in the late 1990s, discovered a cognitive bias so strange and yet so familiar that it instantly resonated with people. They found that individuals with the least competence in a skill often dramatically overestimate their ability, while true experts, who know the vastness of the subject, tend to underestimate themselves. Shakespeare put it centuries earlier: "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." This effect explains why incompetent people rise in influence. If you have little knowledge, you don't realize your limitations. You project certainty. You speak in absolutes, and people are drawn to certainty, like moths to flame. Meanwhile, experts tend to hedge. Well, it depends. The data suggests this, but we need more research. And suddenly, the audience finds them less convincing, even though they're far closer to the truth. Now, combine this psychological tendency with Machiavelli's insight about appearances, and you get a chilling formula. Confidence plus simplicity often outweighs competence plus complexity. Why intelligence can be a liability. But here's where it gets even stranger. A 2017 study in the Journal of Management suggested that intelligence improves leadership potential only up to a point, around an IQ of 100. Beyond that, additional intelligence actually makes it harder to rise as a leader. Why? Because highly intelligent individuals often see too much nuance. They explain in detail. They doubt themselves. They avoid sweeping promises. And in environments where charisma and bold declarations win the day, their very intelligence becomes a handicap. It's almost as if the game of power was never designed for the genuinely thoughtful. Socrates, one of the greatest thinkers in history, famously said, "I know that. I know nothing." That humility made him a philosophical giant, but also a political failure. The Athenian democracy eventually sentenced him to death. Contrast that with countless populist leaders who claimed, "I alone can fix this," and rode the wave of certainty straight into positions of authority. The ancient roots of our bias. Why are humans so drawn to confident simplicity? Evolutionary psychology offers a clue. Imagine our ancestors, thousands of years ago. If the tribe faced a predator, who would inspire more action? The cautious thinker, saying, "Well, there are several possible outcomes depending on the angle of attack." Or the bold warrior shouting, "Follow me, I'll protect us." Confidence signaled survival. Certainty brought cohesion. Doubt, even when justified, could be fatal. But here's the problem. In our complex modern world, the very instincts that once helped us survive now lead us astray. The leader who oversimplifies climate change, economic crises, or technological risks may sound reassuring, but they can push societies toward disaster. The confidence illusion in action. Let's fast forward to modern times. Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos on technology that never worked. Yet her unwavering confidence attracted billions of dollars and powerful allies. Adam Newman of WeWork sold a vision so intoxicating that investors poured billions into what was essentially a real estate company with beanbags. George Armstrong Custer, the American general, led men into catastrophic defeat, propelled by supreme self-confidence that others mistook for competence. These aren't isolated cases. Across cultures and centuries, the same pattern emerges. Confidence persuades more than competence. The psychology of simplistic answers. Here's where philosophy meets psychology. Real experts, whether scientists or philosophers, often emphasize uncertainty. Climate scientists talk in probabilities. Economists warn of trade-off. Doctors admit medicine is rarely black and white. But people crave certainty. In uncertain times, our psychological need for cognitive closure skyrockets. We want definite answers. We want clarity. We want to believe someone has a simple solution. This is why slogans like, "Make X great again," or "I alone can fix it" work. They satisfy our craving for certainty, even when reality is far more complex. Enter Nietzsche, the will to power. Now let's bring Friedrich Nietzsche into the conversation. Nietzsche argued that beneath our morality, beliefs, and politics lies a deeper drive. The will to power, the desire not just to survive, but to impose our vision on the world. From this perspective, the rise of incompetent yet confident leaders isn't just an accident. It's a reflection of humanity's underlying drive. Power doesn't necessarily flow to the wise or the virtuous. It flows to those who project strength and certainty. Nietzsche even warned about the dangers of herd mentality, our tendency to follow the strong voice in times of uncertainty. When we seek safety in the group, we often hand power to those who sound most certain, not those who are most correct. Kant and the ethics of truth. Immanuel Kant, on the other hand, would be horrified by this. For Kant, truth-telling and moral integrity were absolute duties. To manipulate appearances for power would be a violation of moral law. But here's the tragic paradox. In the real world of politics and business, Kantian honesty often loses to Machiavellian strategy. The leader who admits limits is overlooked, while the one who hides weakness and projects false certainty is elevated. This tension between truth and power is one of the oldest struggles in philosophy, and it plays out every single day in modern boardrooms, classrooms, and governments. Your life, your workplace. Let's pause and make this personal. Have you ever worked for a boss who seemed to discourage questions, reward loyalty over competence, and punish people who rocked the boat? That's not just bad management. It's the institutionalization of incompetence. Organizational psychologists call this competence threatening. Insecure leaders often surround themselves with weaker subordinates to avoid being challenged. Machiavelli himself wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. When weak leaders hire weaker staff, incompetence multiplies. It spreads like a virus through the organization." Questions to ponder. Why do we still trust people who offer simple answers to complex problems, even when history repeatedly shows us the danger? Are we more interested in being comforted than being told the truth? And most importantly, how can we recognize when confidence is just a mask for incompetence? The hidden logic of power. If part 1 showed us that confidence often trumps competence, part 2 takes us into the engine room. Why this happens, how it repeats through history, and what it reveals about human psychology. Let's start with a haunting observation from Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher who reported on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the key organizers of the Holocaust. Arendt coined the phrase, "the banality of evil," for insight. Evil isn't always carried out by monstrous geniuses. It's often enabled by ordinary, unthinking bureaucrats who follow orders without question. Incompetence, mixed with obedience, can be just as dangerous as malicious intent. This shows us something deeper. Power doesn't just reward boldness, it rewards predictability, loyalty, and the ability to fit into a structure, even when that structure is corrupt. Case study: Rome, decline of an empire. Let's go back to ancient Rome. When Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, ruled Rome, his reign was marked by wisdom and relative stability. But his successor, Commodus, was very different. Commodus surrounded himself with flatterers and entertainers rather than competent advisors. He enjoyed games, spectacle, and vanity over governance. The result: Rome entered a period of decline. Historians note that this shift from merit-based administration to loyalty-based cronyism weakened the empire. Machiavelli later used Rome as an example of how incompetent rulers intentionally build networks of mediocrity to secure their throne. Rome's lesson is chillingly relevant. When leaders choose loyalty over competence, institutions rot from the inside. The modern parallel: corporations and cronyism. Fast forward to modern corporations. Think about the 2008 financial crisis. Many of the banks that collapsed were filled with executives who rewarded loyalty, risk-taking bravado, and unquestioned optimism. Internal warnings were ignored. Dissenters were silenced. The system didn't collapse because no one saw the risks. It collapsed because the culture punished competence and rewarded conformity. The same mechanism Machiavelli identified in Renaissance politics still operates in Wall Street boardrooms. Aristotle and the golden mean. Now, let's bring Aristotle into the picture. Aristotle taught that virtue lies in the golden mean, the balance between two extremes. Courage, for example, lies between cowardice and recklessness. Leadership, from this perspective, should balance confidence with humility, vision with realism, decisiveness with reflection. But here's the problem. Humans rarely reward the mean. We reward the extreme. We flock to those who show absolute certainty. The golden mean may be rational, but it doesn't inspire mass movements. This mismatch between what is rationally best and what is socially rewarded is one of the great tragedies of human governance. Nietzsche and the psychology of followers. Nietzsche would say this isn't surprising. He argued that most people prefer security over truth, certainty over freedom. He warned about the herd mentality, our tendency to follow the strong voice, rather than embrace the chaos of independent thinking. From Nietzsche's perspective, it's not just that incompetent leaders rise, it's that we want them to rise. We want someone to take responsibility for the terrifying uncertainty of existence. We outsource our courage to those who promise certainty. This explains why, in times of crisis, democracies often flirt with authoritarianism. The more complex the world becomes, the more seductive the illusion of simple answers grows. The science of certainty. Cognitive closure. Psychologists have a term for this: need for cognitive closure. When humans feel threatened or uncertain, we crave quick answers. Studies show that in times of crisis, wars, pandemics, economic recessions, populations are far more likely to support authoritarian figures who project absolute certainty, even when their solutions are simplistic or harmful. A 2017 Yale study showed something even more disturbing. When confronted with complex problems, people's ability to reason logically decreases if the correct solution clashes with their political beliefs. In other words, the smarter we are, the better we become at justifying what we already want to believe. So intelligence doesn't always save us from incompetence in power. Sometimes it makes us even more vulnerable. Foucault: power is everywhere. Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, argued that power isn't just something rulers hold. Power is everywhere. In schools, in hospitals, in prisons, in offices. It operates through systems of knowledge, rules, and norms. From this perspective, the rise of incompetent leaders isn't just about individuals. It's about entire systems that reward conformity, obedience, and appearances. Think about Performance reviews in corporate settings. How often do they reward true innovation versus visibility, confidence, and alignment with leadership goals? Foucault would say that these microsystems of power reproduce the same dynamics we see in politics. Historical echo. The French Revolution. During the French Revolution, the cry for equality and liberty quickly gave way to the reign of terror under Robespierre. Why? Because, in times of chaos, the population turned to leaders who offered certainty through ideology and fear. Robespierre himself wasn't necessarily the most competent administrator. What he had was unwavering conviction. And that conviction, no matter how destructive, was enough to command obedience. This shows us a recurring pattern. Incompetence cloaked in certainty can override competence paired with caution. Modern case. The tech world. Let's step into Silicon Valley. Venture capitalists often admit they're not just investing in ideas, they're investing in founders. And what kind of founder gets funded? The one who pitches with absolute conviction. WeWork's Adam Neumann projected messianic confidence. Investors poured in billions, ignoring the shaky fundamentals. Similarly, Elizabeth Holmes convinced a board filled with former statesmen and generals to believe in technology that simply didn't exist. This isn't about intelligence. Many of these investors were extremely intelligent. It's about psychology, certainty. Doubt repels. The network effect of incompetence. Now let's return to Machiavelli's insight. Rulers surround themselves with weaker advisors. Organizational psychologists call this the competence threat effect. Insecure leaders perceive capable subordinates as threats, so they hire loyal but less competent people. Those subordinates then do the same, creating an ecosystem of mediocrity. This explains why dysfunctional organizations don't just have one bad leader. They often have layers of bad management. Incompetence cascades downward. Think about governments, where ministers are appointed for loyalty rather than expertise. Or corporations, where promotions depend on politics rather than performance. This creates what researchers call homophily, the tendency to hire people like yourself. If the top is insecure and incompetent, the whole structure becomes fragile. Why don't we learn? Here's the million-dollar question. If history keeps showing us the dangers of incompetent yet confident leaders, why do we keep falling for it? The answer may lie in our biology. Neuroscience shows that certainty activates the brain's reward system. Hearing someone speak with absolute conviction reduces our anxiety, even if the content is wrong. Uncertainty, on the other hand, triggers discomfort. In other words, our brains are wired to prefer confident lies over uncomfortable truths. The paradox of education. Does education help? Yes and no. Education teaches critical thinking, but studies show that even highly educated individuals are not immune to the seduction of certainty. In fact, sometimes education makes people better at rationalizing their biases. This was shown in the Yale study we mentioned earlier. The most mathematically skilled participants were also the most biased in interpreting politically charged numbers. Intelligence, instead of freeing them, made them prisoners of their pre-existing beliefs. This raises a profound question. Is intelligence always a blessing, or can it be a curse when it distances us from others? The tragic hero, too smart for power. Consider the figure of Cassandra in Greek mythology. She was given the gift of prophecy, but cursed so that no one would believe her. Cassandra saw the fall of Troy coming, but her warnings were ignored. This myth captures the tragedy of intelligence in politics. The wise often see the complexity of truth, but their very nuance makes them unbelievable to the masses. Meanwhile, the overconfident rise by selling illusions. Why systems matter more than individuals. At this point, you might be wondering, is there any hope? If our psychology and history push us toward incompetent leaders, are we doomed to repeat the cycle forever? This is where philosophy meets political science. The lesson of history isn't that we need perfect leaders. It's that we need systems that check leaders. Singapore, for example, designed its political and corporate institutions to prevent overconfidence from trumping competence. Civil service exams, merit-based appointments, and anti-corruption safeguards created resilience against the confidence illusion. By contrast, countries or organizations without such safeguards fall into cycles of incompetence. Personal reflection. Your own circle of power. But let's not just talk about empires and corporations. Let's talk about you. Think about your own life. Have you ever chosen to follow someone simply because they seemed certain? Have you dismissed someone because they seemed unsure, even though they might have been more knowledgeable? We all fall into this trap. It's not a flaw of other people. It's a flaw of human psychology. Recognizing this in yourself is the first step to breaking the cycle. From awareness to action, we've traveled far. We started by asking why incompetent people so often rise to power. We've walked through Machiavelli's blunt realism, Nietzsche's will to power, Kant's moral demands, and modern psychology's sobering experiments. But the real question now is this. What can you do with this knowledge? Because knowing that incompetence often rises isn't enough. We need strategies for recognizing it, resisting it, and creating systems where competence actually wins. Lesson 1. Beware the illusion of certainty. The first insight is simple, but powerful. Confidence is not competence. The next time you feel drawn to a leader, a boss, or even a friend's advice, ask yourself, are they offering simple answers to complex problems? Do they acknowledge nuance, trade-offs, or uncertainty? Or do they insist they alone have the truth? Remember Machiavelli's warning, everyone sees what you appear to be. Few know what you are. If someone never admits doubt, you may not be seeing confidence. You may be seeing ignorance, wrapped in arrogance. Action step. Train yourself to feel suspicious of overly simple solutions. If it sounds too easy, it probably is. Lesson 2. Value questions over answers. Socrates was executed for asking too many questions, but his method remains one of the most powerful tools against manipulation. The Socratic method isn't about having the right answer. It's about asking the right questions. What do you mean by that? What evidence supports this? What happens if we're wrong? Action step. In meetings, classrooms, or political debates, don't reward the loudest voice. Reward the person who asks the sharpest questions. They are often the ones keeping truth alive. Lesson 3. Build systems, not heroes. History shows us that relying on individual leaders is dangerous. Systems matter more. Rome survived bad emperors for a while because its institutions were strong. Singapore thrives because it created safeguards that prioritize competence. Action step. Personal level. In your workplace, push for processes that value evidence and performance, not just visibility. Create feedback loops, where questioning is encouraged, not punished. Action step. Societal level, support policies and institutions that reduce the impact of charisma and emphasize accountability. That means valuing free press, checks and balances, independent science, and transparent data. Lesson 4. Recognize the competence threat trap. Machiavelli's insight about rulers surrounding themselves with weaker advisors isn't just history. It happens in modern offices, families, and even friendships. Action step. Notice when leaders discourage strong voices. Ask yourself, are promotions based on loyalty or skill? Are dissenters silenced or embraced? If it's the former, you're in a competence training system. And if you're ever in a leadership role, resist the temptation to choose loyalty over ability. It feels safer, but it weakens everything in the long run. Lesson 5. Train your tolerance for uncertainty. This one might be the hardest. Psychologists call it the need for cognitive closure. When we're anxious, we crave certainty. That's when simplistic leaders become most seductive. But here's the truth. The world is complex. Real solutions require trade-offs. If you can train yourself to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate not having immediate answers, you inoculate yourself against the lure of incompetence. Action step. Next time you feel anxious about a decision, resist the urge to grab the first simple solution. Pause. Breathe. Ask, what complexities am I ignoring? This simple habit makes you less vulnerable to manipulative certainty. Lesson 6. Cultivate intellectual humility. Kant would remind us of our duty to truth. Nietzsche would remind us of the danger of the herd. Socrates would remind us that wisdom begins with knowing what we don't know. True strength isn't pretending to know everything. It's being humble enough to keep learning. Action step. Practice saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. This not only makes you more trustworthy, it models better leadership for others. Let me share a quick story. A few years ago, I worked with a manager who always had an answer. Every meeting, no matter the topic, he spoke with absolute certainty. At first, it was comforting. We felt like we had direction. But over time, the cracks showed. His quick answers didn't match reality. Deadlines slipped. Projects collapsed. People stopped speaking up because they feared being labeled negative. Eventually, the entire team underperformed. Not because we weren't capable, but because we were trapped in an illusion of certainty. Then, another leader stepped in. She did something radically different. She admitted when she didn't know. She asked questions. She encouraged debate. At first it felt slower, messier. But soon, the team improved. We weren't chasing illusions anymore. We were solving real problems. The lesson: a little humility saved us from a lot of incompetence. This isn't just about your workplace. It's about democracy itself. When people crave certainty too much, they open the door to authoritarian leaders. History shows this again and again. From ancient Rome to 20th century Europe, philosopher Karl Popper once said, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." That vigilance means constantly questioning whether we are valuing truth over appearances, competence over confidence, substance over slogans. So why do incompetent people rise to power? Because confidence looks like competence. Because our brains crave certainty. Because insecure leaders surround themselves with weaker allies. Because systems often reward appearances over truth. But knowing this gives you power. The power to resist manipulation. The power to value truth. The power to build systems that don't just reward the loudest voice, but the wisest. Key takeaways. Confidence does not equal competence. Don't be seduced by certainty. Ask for evidence. Reward questions, not just answers. Socratic inquiry is more valuable than bold slogans. Strengthen systems. Trust institutions and processes that check power, not just charismatic individuals. Notice the competence threat trap. Insecure leaders avoid strong talent. Real leaders attract it. Build tolerance for uncertainty. Complexity is reality. Simplicity is often a lie. Practice intellectual humility. Admitting what you don't know is a form of strength, not weakness. Final challenge to the viewer. So here's the challenge for you. The next time you feel drawn to someone's confidence, pause. Ask yourself, are they wise or are they just loud? Are they competent or just certain? Because if we can all learn to see through the illusion of certainty, maybe we can finally build a world where the right people, not just the loudest people, rise to power.